Alright, I figure since I'm already set up like this, I might as well do another part of the Night Circus, if my phone will stay in place. Ooh, look, we're almost halfway through the book. Ish. Ugh, I missed them. Alright. Let's hope that me moving my legs isn't going to jostle the camera too much, because I want it to stay like this. Alright, The Magician's Umbrella, Prague, March 1894. The sign upon the gates of the Cirque de Rêve tonight is a large one, hung with braided ribbon that wraps around the bars just above the lock. The letters are tall enough to be read from some ways off, though people still walk right up to it to read it. Closed due to inclement weather, it says, in a fancy script surrounded by playfully painted gray clouds. Aww. People read the sign sometimes twice and then look at the setting sun and the clear violet sky and scratch their heads. And they stand around and some wait to see if the sign will be removed and the circus opened, but there is no one in sight, and eventually the small crowd disperses to find alternate activities for their evening. An hour later it starts. Sheets of rain pouring down and wind that ripples across the surface of the striped tents. The sign on the gates dances in the wind, shimmering and wet. At the other end of the circus, at a part of the fence that looks nothing like a gate but opens nonetheless, Celia Bowen steps out from the shadows of darkened tents and into the rain, opening her umbrella with some difficulty. It is a large umbrella with a heavy curved handle, and once Celia manages to get it open, it provides quite good cover against the rain, though the lower half of her wine-colored gown is quickly soaked to the point where it appears almost black. She walks without much notice into the city, though there is not much notice to attract in such a downpour. She passes only a handful of other pedestrians on the cobblestone streets, each partially hidden beneath an umbrella. Eventually, Celia stops at a brightly lit cafe, crowded and lively despite the weather. She adds her umbrella to the collection gathering in the stands by the door. There are a few unoccupied tables, but the empty chair that catches Celia's eye is one by the fireplace across from Isabel, where she sits with a cup of tea and her nose buried in a book. Celia has never been entirely certain what to make of the fortune-teller, though she has an innate distrust of anyone whose occupation involves telling people what they wish to hear. And Isabel sometimes has the same look in her eyes Celia often catches in Tsukiko's glances, that she knows more than she lets on. She does. Though perhaps that is not unusual for someone in the business of telling other people what their future holds. "May I join you?" Celia asks. Isabel looks up, the surprise clear in her expression, but the surprise is quickly replaced by a bright smile. "Of course," Isabel says, marking her page before placing her book aside. "I can't believe you ventured out in the weather. I only just missed the start of it earlier, and I thought I'd wait it out. I was meant to be meeting someone, but I don't think they'll be coming, considering." "I can't blame them," Celia says, pulling off her damp gloves. She shakes them gently, and they dry instantly. It's rather like walking through a river out there. "Are you avoiding the inclement weather party?" "That's a great name! Inclement weather party. I want to have one of those." "I made an appearance before I escaped. I'm not in a party mood this evening. Besides, I don't like giving up an opportunity to leave the circus for a change of atmosphere, even if it means practically drowning to do so." "I like to escape once in a while myself," Isabel says. "Did you make it rain to have a night off?" "Of course not," Celia says, though if that were true, I think I overdid it. Even as she speaks, Celia's rain-soaked gown is drying, the almost black color returning to a rich wine, though it is not entirely clear whether this is caused by the nearby fire burning merrily, or if it is a subtle transformation she is performing herself. Isabel and Celia chat about the weather and Prague and books, not purposefully avoiding the topic of the circus, but keeping the distance from it alive, remaining for the moment only two women sitting at a table, rather than a fortune-teller and an illusionist, an opportunity they are not frequently presented with. A harried-looking waitress pauses at their table and Celia requests a mint tea. Oh. As the waitress departs, Celia casts a long look around the room, scanning the crowd as though she's looking for someone but not finding a point to focus on. "Is something the matter?" Isabel asks. "Oh, it's nothing," Celia says, a hint of feeling that we're being watched, but it's likely just my imagination. "Better not be fucking Alexander." "Maybe someone has recognized you," Isabel suggests. I doubt that, Celia says as she looks at the surrounding patrons, not finding a single eye turned in their direction. People see what they want to see. I'm sure this place has had more than its share of unusual patrons with the circus in town. It makes it easier for us to blend in. I'm always amazed that no one recognizes me out of context, Isabel says. I've read for a handful of people in this very room over the past few nights, and not one of them has so much as given me a second glance. Perhaps I do not look so mysterious when not surrounded by candles and velvet. Or perhaps they pay more attention to the cards than they do to me. Do you have your cards with you? Celia asks. Isabel nods. Would you like a reading? She asks. If you do not mind. Not once have you ever asked me to read for you. I'm not usually in the mood to know anything about my future, Celia says. Tonight, I'm feeling a tiny bit curious. Isabel hesitates, glancing around at the clientele, a mostly bohemian crowd, sipping absinthe and arguing about art. They will not even notice, Celia says, I promise. Isabel turns her attention back to Celia, and then she pulls a deck from her bag. Not her black and white circus cards, but her original Marseille deck, worn and faded. Those are lovely, Celia says to Isabel. Celia says as Isabel starts to shuffle, watching the shifting blur of cards. Thank you. But there are only 77 of them. Isabel's hands falter only momentarily, but a single card falls from the deck onto the table. Celia picks it up, briefly glancing at the 2 cups upon the surface before handing it back to Isabel, who replaces it in the deck and resumes shuffling, the cards falling seamlessly from one hand to the other. Is the other one in the hat with the hair? I might be remembering that wrong. Whatever. One of them is somewhere else, Isabel explains. Celia does not question her further. The waitress brings Celia's mint tea, not even glancing at the cards before departing again. Okay, now I want tea. Did you do that? Isabel asks. I diverted her attention, yes, Celia says after blowing gently on the surface of her steaming tea. It's not exactly what she means, but the invisible veil she has drawn over the table seems too difficult to explain. And the fact that the feeling they're being watched has not faded despite its presence bothers her. I swear it's Alexander. Or it's Marco. It seems more sinister, though, so it's either Alexander or her father. I feel like she would recognize it, though, if it was her father. I don't know. Isabel stops shuffling and places the deck face down on the table. Celia cuts the deck in 3 without waiting for Isabel to instruct her, holding the edges of the cards carefully as she places each pile in a row across the table. Which one? Isabel asks. Celia regards the 3 piles of cards thoughtfully while she sips her tea. After a moment, she indicates the center pile. Isabel stacks the deck once more, keeping that section of cards on the top. The cards that she places on the table have no immediate clarity to them. Several cups, the 2 of swords, la papessa, the enigmatic priestess. Isabel only barely manages to contain her involuntary intake of breath as she lays la Bechdel over the already placed cards. She covers it with a cough. Celia appears not to notice anything amiss. That's Marco. Marco's card. The magician, as far as I can remember. I'm sorry, Isabel says, after staring silently at the cards for a few moments. Sometimes it takes a while for me to translate properly. Take your time, Celia says. Isabel pushes the cards around the table, focusing on one and then another. You carry a great many burdens with you, a heavy heart, things you've lost. But you're moving towards change and discovery. There are outside influences that are propelling you forward. See, she knows all of this already. Celia's expression reveals nothing. She looks at the cards and occasionally up at Isabel, attentive, yet guarded. You're not fighting. That's not really the word for it, but there's a conflict with something unseen, something shadowed that's hidden from you. Also something she knows. Celia only smiles. Isabel places another card on the table. But it will be revealed soon, she says. This catches Celia's attention. How soon? The cards do not make for the clearest of timelines, but it's very close. Almost immediate, I would think. Isabel pulls another card. The 2 of cups again. There's emotion, she says. Deep emotion, but you're only on the shore of it, still near the surface, while it is waiting to pull you under. That's a good metaphor for emotions. Interesting, Celia remarks. It's nothing that I can clearly see as good or bad, but it is intense. Celia pushes the cards around a bit, la Bechdel and la papessa, surrounded by fire-tinged wands and watery cups. That makes me think of, God, which opera is it? Magic Flute, where they go through the fire and the water as their, trials. Anyway. The crackle of the fire next to them mingles with the rain pattering against the windows. It almost contradicts itself, she says after a moment. It's as if there is love and loss at the same time, together in a kind of beautiful pain. Isn't that just life for you, though? Well, that sounds like something to look forward to, Celia says dryly, and Isabel smiles, glancing up from the cards but finding little to read in Celia's expression. I'm sorry I cannot be more clear, she says. If anything comes to me later, I'll let you know. Sometimes I need to ruminate on the cards before I can make any real sense of them. These are not unclear precisely, but they're complex, which makes for a great deal of possibilities to consider. No need for apologies. I cannot say I'm terribly surprised, and thank you. I very much appreciate the insight. Celia changes the subject then, though the cards remain on the table and Isabel does not move to put them away. They discuss less substantial matters until Celia insists that she should be getting back to the circus. Do wait until the rain lets up at least, Isabel protests. I have monopolized enough of your time already, and the rain is only rain. I hope the someone you were waiting for turns up. I'm doubtful about that, but thank you, and thank you for keeping me company. It was my pleasure, Celia says, rising from the table as she replaces her gloves. She navigates the crowded cafe with ease, pulling a dark-handled umbrella from the stand by the door and giving Isabel a parting wave before bracing herself for the walk back to the circus in the pouring rain. Isabel pushes the tangled path of the cards on the table around a bit. She did not lie exactly. She finds it near impossible to lie about the cards. I like that. That's very interesting. But the competition is clear, so much so that everything else is tied to it, past and future. At the same time, it seems to be more of a reading for the circus as a whole than for Celia in particular, but it's so emotional that it overwhelms the details. Isabel piles the cards and shuffles them back into the deck. Le Bateleur floats to the top as she shuffles, and she frowns at the card before glancing around the cafe. While there are a few scattered bowler hats amongst the patrons, there is no sign of the one she's looking for. She shuffles until the magician is buried deep within the deck, and then she puts her cards away and returns to the book to wait out the rain alone. Returns to her book. Outside, the rain is heavy and the street is dark and almost completely deserted, glowing windows dotting the streets. It's not as cold as Celia had expected, despite the chilling wind. She cannot read the tarot well herself, but there are always too many possibilities, too many meanings. But once Isabel pointed out specific elements, she could see the complicated emotion, the impending revelation. She's unsure what to make of it, though despite her skepticism, she hopes it means she will finally be certain who her opponent is. She remains distracted as she walks, considering the cards, but she slowly realizes that she is rather warm. At least as warm, if not warmer, than she had been sitting near the fire with Isabel. More than that, her clothes are still dry, her jacket, her gloves, even the hem of her gown. There is not a single drop of rain upon her, although it continues to pour, the wind causing the rain to fall in several directions beyond the standard gravitational pattern. Drops splatter upward from pond-like puddles and blow in sideways, but Celia does not feel any of them. Even her boots are not the slightest bit damp. Yeah, I think it's Marco. Celia stops walking as she reaches the open square, halting next to the towering astronomical clock where carved apostles are making their scheduled hourly appearance despite the weather. She stands still in the downpour. The rain falls so thickly around her that she can hardly see more than a few paces ahead, but she remains both warm and dry. She holds her hand out in front of her, beyond the cover of the umbrella. Oh, it's Marco's umbrella! Oh, okay, I got it. And regards it carefully, but not a single drop of rain falls upon it. Those that come close suddenly change direction before hitting her glove, bouncing off as though she's surrounded by something invisible and impermeable. It is around this time that Celia becomes certain that the umbrella she's holding is not her own. Excuse me, Miss Bowen, a voice calls out to her, lifted over the din of the rain and carried down the street. A voice she recognizes even before she turns to find Marco standing behind her, completely drenched in the rain, droplets cascading from the brim of his bowler hat. In his hand, he holds a closed black umbrella identical to the one she carries. I believe you have my umbrella, he says, almost out of breath, but wearing a grin that has too much wolf in it to be properly sheepish. I love that phrase. A grin that has too much wolf in it to be properly sheepish. That's amazing. Celia stares up at him in surprise. At first she wonders what on earth Chandrash's assistant is doing in Prague, as she has never seen him outside of London. Then comes the question of how he could possess such an umbrella. As she stares at him confused, the pieces of the puzzle begin to shift together. She remembers every encounter she has ever had with the man now standing before her in the rain, recalling the distress he had exhibited at her audition, the years of glances and comments she had read as no more than coy flirtation, and the constant impression as though he is not really there, blending so well into the background that she would occasionally forget he was in the room. Before, she thought it was a sign of a very good assistant, never accounting for how deceptive such an appearance might be. She suddenly feels rather stupid, for not once considering the possibility that this could be her opponent. And then Celia begins to laugh, a buoyant giggle that harmonizes with the din of the rain. Marco's grin wavers as he watches her, blinking water from his eyes. Once Celia composes herself, she gives him a low, perfect curtsy. She hands him the umbrella, gasping as the rain seizes her the moment the handle passes from her fingers. He hands her the identical umbrella. "My sincere apologies," she says, the amusement still sparkling in her eyes. "I'd very much like to speak with you if you'd care to join me for a drink," Marco says. His bowler hat is already dry as he attempts in vain to cover them both with the open umbrella. The wind whips Celia's dark curls in wet ropes across her face as she considers him, watching his eyes as the raindrops evaporate from his lashes. For all the years of wondering, being faced with her opponent is not what she'd expected. She'd expected to be someone she knew, someone inside the bounds of the circus rather than the outside, but still involved. There are so many questions, so many things she longs to discuss despite her father's constant nagging about not concerning herself with her opponent. But at the same time she feels suddenly exposed, aware that he has always known where each of them has stood. Known every time he opened the door for her or took notes for Chandresh, every time he stared at her as he does now, with those disconcertingly bright green eyes. Is he secretly Harry Potter? I'm sorry. Still, it is a tempting invitation. Perhaps if she was not nearly drowning from the rain, she would accept it. "Of course you would," Celia says, returning Marco's grin with one of her own. "Perhaps another time." She opens her own umbrella with some difficulty, and as she swings the canopy of black silk over her head, she and her umbrella vanish, leaving only drops of rain falling onto the empty pavement. Alone in the rain, Marco regards the space where Celia has been standing for some time before he walks away into the night. Regards the space where Celia had been standing for some time. Ooh, it's one of the little fragments. Reflections and distortions. The sign says Hall of Mirrors, but when you enter, you find it's more than a simple hall. You're met not with floor-length, unadorned planes of mirrored glass, as you expected, but hundreds of mirrors of varying sizes and shapes, each in a different frame. As you move past one mirror reflecting your boots, the mirror next to it shows only empty space, and the mirrors on the other side. Your scarf is not present in one mirror, and it returns in the next. Reflected behind you, there's a man in a bowler hat, though he appears in some mirrors and not in others. When you turn, you cannot locate him in the room, though there are more patrons walking along with you than you had seen within the glass. The hall leads to a round room, the light within it bright as you enter. It radiates from a tall lamp-post that sits in the center, towering black iron with a frosted glass lamp that looks as though it would be more at home on a city street corner than in a circus tent. The walls here are completely mirrored, each long mirror placed to a line with a striped ceiling visible above and the floor that's painted to match. As you walk farther into the room, it becomes a field of endless street lamps, the stripes repeating in fractal patterns over and over and over. That is so cool. Oh my god. Cartomancy. I don't think I've ever said that word out loud before. I may have said it wrong. I really hope it's not cartomancy. No, that sounds awkward. Either way, Concord, Massachusetts, October 1902. As he continues to walk around the circus, Bailey's path leads back to the courtyard. He stops briefly to watch the sparkling bonfire and then at a vendor to purchase a bag of chocolates to make up for his mostly uneaten dinner. The chocolates are shaped like mice, with almond ears and licorice tails. That's adorable! He eats 2 immediately and puts the rest of the bag in the pocket of his coat, hoping they will not melt. I don't think they will. He chooses another direction to leave the courtyard, circling away from the bonfire again. He passes several tents with interesting signs, but none that he feels compelled to enter just yet, still playing the illusionist's performance over in his mind. As the path turns, he comes upon a smaller tent with a lovely, elaborate sign, Fortune Teller. He can read that bit easily, but the rest is a complex swirl of intricate letters, and Bailey has to walk right up to it to read, Fates foretold, in the darkest desires disclosed. Ooh. Bailey looks around. For a moment, there is no one else in sight in either direction, and the circus feels eerily similar to the way it had when he snuck through the fence in the middle of the day, as though it is empty save for himself and the things and people that are already there. That are always there. The ongoing argument about his future echoes in his ears as he enters the tent. Bailey finds himself in the room that reminds him of his grandmother's parlor, only smelling less like lavender. I have a lavender candle burning right now. There are seats, but all of them are unoccupied, and a sparkling chandelier captures Bailey's attention for a moment before he notices the curtain. It's made up of strings of shiny beads. Bailey has never seen anything like it. It shimmers in the light, and he is not entirely sure whether he should walk through it or wait for some sort of sign or a notice. He looks around for an informatively worded sign, but finds nothing. He stands confused in the empty vestibule, and then a voice calls out from behind the beaded curtain. "Do come in, please," the voice says. A woman's voice, quiet, and sounding as though she's standing right next to him, though Bailey is sure that the voice came from the next room. Hesitantly, he puts out a hand to touch the beads, which are smooth and cold, and he finds that his arms slip through them easily, that they part like water or long grass. Oh man, I used to have a beaded curtain over the door of my room when I was a kid. They would always get really tangled, though. Oh man, I completely forgot about that. I had a lot of fun making them. Anyway, the room he is in now is much less like his grandmother's parlor. Oh, sorry, I skipped a sentence. The beads clatter as the strands hit one another, and a sound that echoes in the dark space sounds like rain. The room he is in now is much less like his grandmother's parlor. It is filled with candles, and there is a table in the center with an empty chair on one side and a lady dressed in black with a long, thin veil over her face seated on the other. On the table there's a deck of cards and a large glass sphere. "Have a seat, please, young man," the lady says, and Bailey walks a few steps to the empty chair and sits down. The chair is surprisingly comfortable, not like the stiff chair at his grandmother's, though they do look remarkably similar. It only now strikes Bailey that, other than the red-haired girl, he has never heard any person in the circus speak. What about the vendors? The illusionist was silent for her entire performance, though he had not noticed it at the time. "I'm afraid payment is required before we may begin," she says. Bailey's relieved that he has excess pocket money for the unplanned expense. "How much is payment?" he asks. "Whatever you wish to pay for a glimpse of your future," the fortune teller says. Bailey stops to consider this for a moment. It's strange, but fair. He pulls what he hopes is a suitable amount from his pocket and puts it on the table. The woman does not pick up the money, but passes her hand over it, and it disappears. "Now, what is it you would like to know?" she asks. "About my future," Bailey says. "My grandmother wants me to go to Harvard, but my father wants me to take over the farm." "And what do you want?" the fortune teller asks. "I don't know," Bailey says. She laughs in response, but in a friendly way, and it makes Bailey feel more at ease, as though he's just talking to a regular person and not someone mysterious or magical. "Oh, Bailey, I feel you. I feel you so bad." "That's fine," she says. "We can see what the cards have to say about the matter." The fortune teller picks up the deck and shuffles, shifting the cards from one hand to the other. They fold over and under each other in waves. Then she spreads them out across the table in one fluid motion, forming an arc of identical black and white patterned card backs. Choose a single card. "Take your time. This will be your card, the one that will represent you." Bailey looks at the arc of cards and frowns. They all look the same. Slivers of pattern, some wider than the other, some not quite as evenly lined up as the rest. He looks back and forth from one end to end, and then one of them catches his eye. It is more hidden than the rest, almost completely covered by the card above it. Only the edge is visible. He reaches out for it, but hesitates just before his hand reaches it. "I can touch it?" he asks. He feels the same as when he was first allowed to touch the table with the nicest dishes, as though he really shouldn't be allowed to touch such things, mixed with an acute fear of breaking something. But the fortune teller nods, and Bailey puts a finger on the card and pulls it away from its compatriots so it sits separately on the table. "You may turn it over," the fortune teller says, and Bailey flips the card. On the other side, it is not like the black and red playing cards he is used to, with hearts and clubs and spades and diamonds. Instead, it is a picture, inked in black and white and shades of gray. The illustration is of a knight on horseback, like a knight from a fairy tale. His horse is white and his armor is gray. There are dark clouds in the background. His horse is mid-gallop, the knight leaning forward in the saddle with sword drawn as though he's on his way to a great battle of some sort. Bailey stares at the cards, wondering where the knight is going and what the card is supposed to mean. Cavalier d'Épée, it reads in fancy script at the bottom of the card. The Knight of Swords? God, I can't remember what épée is. I was thinking lances, but that's not a suit. It's cups, wands, swords, and I can't remember. Whatever. This is supposed to be me? Bailey asks. The woman smiles as she pushes the arc of cards back into a neat pile. It's meant to represent you in your reading. She says it could mean movement or travel. The cards do not always mean the same thing every time. They change with each person. That must make them hard to read, Bailey says. The woman laughs again. Sometimes, she says. Shall we give it a try anyway? Bailey nods and she shuffles the cards again over and under and then divides them into 3 piles and places them in front of him, above the card with the knight. Pick the pile which you are most drawn to, she says. Bailey studies the piles of cards. One is less neat, another larger than the other 2. His eyes keep going back to the pile on the right. This one, he says, and though it's mostly a guess, it feels like the proper choice. The fortune teller nods and stacks 3 piles of cards back into one deck, leaving Bailey's chosen cards on top. She flips them over, one at a time, laying them face up in an elaborate pattern across the table, some overlapping and others in rows, until there are about a dozen cards laid out. They are black and white pictures, much like the knight, some simpler, some more complicated. Many show people in various settings, and a few have animals, while some of them have cups or coins. Coins! That's what I forgot. And there are more swords. Their reflections catch and stretch in the crystal sphere that sits alongside. For a few moments, the fortune teller looks at the cards, and Bailey wonders if she's waiting for them to tell her something. And he thinks she is smiling, but trying to hide it just a bit. This is interesting, the fortune teller says. She touches one card, a lady in flowing robes holding a set of scales, and another that Bailey cannot see as well, but looks like a crumbling castle. Ooh, that's probably the tower. What's interesting, Bailey asks, still confused about the process. He knows no ladies in blindfolds, has been to no crumbling castles. He's not even sure there are any castles in New England. You have a journey ahead of you, the fortune teller says. There's a lot of movement, a great deal of possibility. She pushes one card, turns another around, and furrows her brow a bit, though Bailey still thinks she looks like she's trying to hide a smile. It is becoming easier to see her expression through the veil as his eyes adjust to the candlelight. You're part of a chain of events, though you may not see how your actions will affect the outcome at the time. I'm going to do something important, but I have to go somewhere first, Bailey asks. He had not expected fortune-telling to be so vague. The journey part does seem to favor his grandmother's side, though even if Cambridge is not very far. The fortune-teller does not immediately respond. Instead, she flips over another card. This time, she does not hide her smile. You're looking for Poppet, she says. What's a Poppet? He asks. The fortune-teller does not answer, and instead looks up from her cards and regards him quizzically. Bailey feels her taking in his entire appearance, or more than that, with her eyes moving over his face from his scarf to his hat. He shifts in his chair. Are you Bailey? She asks. The color drains from Bailey's cheeks, and all the apprehension and nervousness he had felt earlier returns instantly. Oh, baby, don't be nervous. He has to swallow before he can make himself answer, in barely more than a whisper. Yes? He says. It sounds like a question, as though he's not entirely sure that is his name. The fortune-teller smiles at him, a bright smile that makes him realize she's not nearly as old as he previously thought, perhaps only a few years older than he is. Interesting, she says. He wishes she would choose a different word. We have a mutual acquaintance, Bailey. She looks back down at the cards on her table. You're here this evening looking for her, I believe, though I do appreciate that you've chosen to visit my tent as well. Bailey blinks at her, trying to take in everything she said, and wondering how on earth she knows the real reason he is at the circus when he hasn't told no one about it and hardly even admits it to himself. You know the red-haired girl, he says, unable to fully believe that this is indeed what the fortune-teller means. But she nods. I have known her and her brother all their lives, she says. She's a very special girl with very lovely hair. Is she still here? Bailey asks. I only met her once, the last time the circus was here. She is here, the fortune-teller says. She pushes the cards around on the table a bit more, touching one and then another, though Bailey is no longer paying attention to which card is which. You will see her again, Bailey. There's no doubt about that. Bailey resists the urge to ask when, and instead waits to see if she has anything else to add about the cards. The fortune-teller moves a card here and there. She picks up the card with the knight from where it sits and places it on top of the crumbling castle. Do you like the circus, Bailey? She asks, looking up at him again. No shit. It's like no place I've ever been, Bailey says. Not that I've been many places, he adds quickly, but I think the circus is wonderful. I like it very much. That would help, the fortune-teller says. Help with what? Bailey asks, but the fortune-teller does not answer. Instead, she flips over another card from the deck, placing it over the card with the knight. It is a picture of a lady pouring water into a lake, a bright shining star over her head. Who's the star, I wonder? But that also means that Isabel knows more than I think even Marco or Celia know. She knows something that they don't. About the future of the circus or Bailey. It's still difficult to discern her expressions through her veil, but Bailey is certain that she frowns at the card as she places it on the table. Though when she looks back up at him, the expression is gone. You'll be fine, the fortune teller says. There may be decisions to make and surprises in store. Life takes us to unexpected places sometimes. The future is never set in stone. Remember that. I will, Bailey says. He thinks the fortune teller looks a bit sad as she begins to gather up the cards on the table, putting them back into a neat pile. She saves the knight for last, placing him on the top of the deck. Thank you, Bailey says. He did not receive as clear an answer about his future as he had expected, but somehow the issue does not seem as heavy as it had before. He debates whether to leave, unsure of proper fortune-telling etiquette. You're welcome, Bailey, the fortune teller says. It was a pleasure to read for you. Bailey reaches into his pocket and pulls out the bag of chocolate mice and offers it to her. Would you like a mouse, he says. Before he can mentally berate himself for doing something so silly, the fortune teller smiles, though for a moment there's something sad beneath it. Something almost sad beneath it. Why, yes, I would, she says, pulling one of the chocolate mice out of the bag by its licorice tail. She places it on top of the crystal sphere. They're one of my favorites, she confides. Thank you, Bailey. Enjoy the rest of your time at the circus. I will, Bailey says. He stands up and walks back to the beaded curtain. He reaches to part the strings of beads and stops suddenly and turns around. What's your name? He asks the fortune teller. You know, I'm not sure any of my querents have ever asked that before, she says. My name's Isabel. It was very nice to meet you, Isabel, Bailey says. It was nice meeting you too, Bailey, Isabel says. And you might want to go down the path to your right when you leave, she adds. Bailey nods and turns back, pushing through the strands of beads into the still empty vestibule. The beads are not so loud as they settle, and when they quiet, everything is soft and still, as though there is no other room behind them, no fortune teller sitting at her table. Bailey feels oddly at ease, as though he's closer to the ground, but taller at the same time. His concerns about his future no longer weigh so heavily on him as he exits the tent, turning right down the curving path that winds between the striped tents. Oh, man. I wish I had an Isabel to read my future for me and make me feel a little bit better about it. Alright, well, that's it for now.